There we go. And now I'll share. Okay, and this is where we ended last week. Does this look familiar? You can see it again? There we
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So this is where we ended last week. And this would be a what I would call a biblical, like a biblical psychological model of manifestation. So this is heavily rooted in the psychological literature and is also brought over to like a biblical framework where God created the human mind and all of our minds work in similar ways. And if I believe that I can do something or I have faith that God can help me do something, then I actually try. And the more I try, the better I get. And sooner or later, with God's help and guidance, then the fruit comes. And it's not magic. It's not to say that God can't provide with miracles miraculously, but he's guiding and I'm working. And somewhere between the two of those comes the fruit. So when you get to toxic and unhealthy beliefs like I can't, my two kids who are I have two foster kids and they say I can't all the time, and we say that's a bad word, you're not allowed to say that because that's not faithful. That's you can do all things with Christ who strengthens you. And I think that is a very psychological concept that's grounded right in the Bible. And we call it psychology today, but back then it's just this is how God wants you to think. So anyway, coming over, I want to build. So I'm just calling these models because as we look at these, they explain how we see reality. And if God made the world, then it exists in some kind of way. And I would rather float downstream than try to swim upstream. And I see a lot of ministry leaders trying to swim upstream. I don't want to do that. I would rather just use the things God created in the way he intended them to be created. So coming over here, up to this point, and we're going to talk today about beliefs, but up to this point, we've kind of laid the foundation of how to create a fruitful ministry. And so I'm going to kind of show you the larger process, the larger, what do you want to say? I don't know, strategy for kind of the education that we're going through. So we've talked about so far, and I'm going to zoom in here. We've talked about the vision and the mission. And we've talked about the churchgoer journey, and you can kind of see our little diagram there. And that's what we've talked about up to this point, a little bit more than that, and we'll see that as well. The beliefs, though, is what I want to focus on right now for today, and we'll look at the rest of this as we go. But the beliefs are what we're coming into, and we're going to look at a number of beliefs that, as someone who is 100% committed to Jesus, I have 3 businesses, and this is my favorite. It's fun because it's meaningful and it's impactful, and this is what I love. And as someone who is committed to Jesus and someone who has done secular sales and sales with churches, I've worked in secular corporate situations. I've worked in discipleship schools. I've been a youth pastor. I've been in and out of the church, and I've seen how it works both ways. And we started the whole training with the world is a functional system. God created a system. He put the laws of, God's not, do I think God like sustains the universe? And when he said it's done, it's over? Absolutely. Do I think he is actively, holding every single atom together? No. That's called the strong nuclear force. And he made that, and it just keeps things going, and there's a whole bunch of those. Either way, we won't go to physics. But there are systems in place that keep the world functioning as it does because the world is a system and God created it to be that way. Well, the secular world knows that. They understand natural revelation. And, there's a reason why McDonald's, for example, only offers 8 things on the menu, because they understand the 80-20 principle, and they understand 20% of the things on that menu get them 80% of their income. And then they just do those things. They cut out, they used to have a whole bunch of things and they cut it all out because they understand that the world works on systems. And they just try to use those to their advantage and float down the lazy river instead of trying to swim up it. Now, this one of the things that ministry leaders have is a lot of conflicting beliefs. And as I talk with ministry leaders, and the reason why we're going so deep into these things is, obviously I'm going to be using these on our platform, but it's because ministry leaders are consistently trying to implement things to grow their ministry. So we'll say social media, or I don't know, well, we're going to start a TV station or a radio network, or there's all kinds of stuff. But what they fail to recognize is that the issue isn't with the things they're doing. It is what is going on in their mind while they're doing it. It's their beliefs, the direction. It's like, oh, it's not in alignment with the vision. Now I'm not really sure what you're doing at all. If you're a missions organization, why do you have a radio station? I don't see the justification. Does it meet a need? Well, we're helping homeless people, so they don't have radios. Why are you starting a radio station? So they don't go through sort of this initial foundational decision-making process, and we're going to add more to that. Or, for example, I want to, how would I say this? They have directly conflicting beliefs. So they'll believe something like, well, we need to increase tithes, and at the same time, money is the root of all evil. I've heard that before. And so it's like, well, okay, we could talk about increasing tithes, but it's going to be real hard to, bring your ministry into a financially stable position. And like, for example, we've had some clients that have multiple coffee shops in their ministry that are very lucrative, and they fund a ministry with it. That's awesome. The Salvation Army has thrift stores that provide affordable clothing for low-income families and people. And they take that and they turn that around and they fund their alcohol rehabilitation centers with it. That's brilliant. But if you think business is bad and money is bad, you can't do those things, because that would immediately create confliction inside of you that makes you incapable of bringing that fruit out. Now, is that biblical? I do. I think that's biblical. And so I'm going to go through a couple passages here. In James, it says, if any of you, I've got it right here, but I'm working on my memory. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask for it. And, oh, yep, there it goes. Let me see. I want to make sure I get this right. Yeah, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But if you, I'm just going to read it. I had it earlier. And it will be given to you. But if you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind, and that person should expect nothing. So it says, believe and not doubt. They should not expect to receive anything from the Lord, because such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Well, double-minded means one belief is canceling the other belief. The wave is going this way, and then the wave is going that way. You cannot do anything consistently over time if, like, for example, we're going for this vision right here, and then we're going for a different vision. It's like radio station vision, missions vision. Where are you going? You can't make anything happen if our beliefs are not consistent. And we see this in the fruit of people's lives in the Bible as well. For example, Peter gets out of the boat. He says, Lord, I think it's Peter. He says, Lord, if it's you, call to me and have me come out to you on the waves. And he's like, all right, come on out. And so Peter walks on water and then begins to sink. And Jesus says, you of little faith, why do you doubt? Or why did you doubt? So he's doing the impossible so long as he has the faith to do it. And as soon as he starts allowing other beliefs, mainly doubt, to come in, it cancels his ability to produce this fruit. And obviously that is a very miraculous fruit. People aren't just walking on water. In another instance, you've got like Elijah or Elisha. I forget which one of the two. However, it's the woman who is destitute, and she has, I believe, a son, and they have no food. And the prophet says, go and collect all of the jars that you can get. Well, it's so interesting because when you see these miracles, something is still required from these people. They do get a miracle, but it's based on faithful action. So go get all the jars you can get. Well, she goes and she gets all the jars until presumably she couldn't get any more jars. And then how many of those jars were filled with the oil? Exactly as many as she brought.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So her belief in this prophet's ability to bless her led her. I'm going to go backwards here. So she believed him. She
Mm-hmm.
goes, oh, I believe him, and I should go get all the pots. And she's probably hopeful and excited. And then what? She goes and gets all the pots she can find, and then he fills exactly all of them. Um, you know, so there's a bunch of those in the Bible. I actually at one point started to study to see if there were any miracles that Jesus did that didn't require someone to do something. The blind man had to wash his face in the whatever. He spit in his eyes and he said, go wash your eyes or something to that effect. I don't know. Anyway, not making that point, but here we see that when Peter doubted, he lost the fruit. When the woman filled the pots, she got the fruit. And so even in a miraculous sense, it seems like when there is a belief that is not only correct and righteous, but held firmly without shifting, that is when the fruit can manifest either miraculously or just because God is having you work consistently, to grow your ministry, something to that effect. We'll obviously leave that open for whichever way God takes it. And then the question then is, well, what does it mean to have faith? So we have to have faith and not doubt. But this is such an interesting question in the church today. Faith inside? It's faith in my heart, or is it not faith in my heart? Well, in James 2:14, what good is it? Hold on. Is that? Okay, yep, there you go. I'm going to summarize a different part. Yep. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone and I'm also not talking about salvation here. We're talking about fruit. So I want to clarify that because this can be debated any which way on salvation. But what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? That's the salvation question. I think he's implying no, but that's not the point we're going for. Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace and keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if not accompanied by action, is dead. And then he goes on to say, was not our father Abraham, I'm skipping forward a little bit, considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac at the altar? You see that his faith, so here's an interesting use of the word faith, the faith inward and his actions, obviously outward, were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. So the faith inward without action is incomplete. When we bring the faith outward, it's complete, whatever that means. And this is the next part that's really great. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. So when it says Abraham believed God, it means he had faith inward and then brought it out and completed it. Well, that is a biblical process of manifestation. When you have faith and then you act on it, then you have the ability to create fruit in your life. Right? So any thoughts or questions on that before we kind of move on from here?
Well, that fits with my theology for sure. So
Cool.
yeah.
And I try not to get too far, especially into salvational issues, because especially with ministry leaders, it's like
very diverse, I'm sure.
yeah, it's very diverse. And, not only that, this isn't really about theology as much as it is about how does the world work and how do we use God's creation and be fruitful and multiply in a, what do you want to say? Like a bringing people to faith and discipleship sort of way. So in regard to salvation, that is an extraordinarily difficult question. But in regard to fruit, a good tree bears good fruit and a bad tree bears bad fruit. So the fruit that comes off of our tree comes from our beliefs, and not just our internal belief, but the belief that we hold dearly enough that we can take action on it and engage with reality. And then somewhere between God's miraculous and God created the world to reward certain behavior, somewhere in there, fruit comes out. And so I just want to kind of put that out there because we are going to build on that with some various beliefs that I have seen ministry leaders have that really restrict their ministries from flourishing.
Yep.
Any thoughts or questions on any of that?
No, this is all kind of tying back into the not just God doing it, not just us doing it, but doing it together. So yeah.
We're definitely partnering with God. Yeah. And I, especially when I was younger, it was like, I think ministry leaders are like, God, you do it. It's miracles. It's the right. And for me, it's like, I don't need your help. I got this. Just let me do the thing you told me to do. It's exactly opposite. So yeah, coming to the center. Okay, so this is the foundation. Well, from here is the decision-making process. And this is not, by the way, this is not I did not make this up. This is from a lot of places, but this is this is from a gentleman named Sam Ovens, and I say it's from him. I kind of learned the basic concept and then looked for biblical and kind of like took what he was teaching and put it in more of a biblical framework after really thinking about it. So there's some stuff in here that's not his, that's more from my own education, and then some stuff that is his. But the basic idea that there are layers of understanding that create fruit. So the foundational layer, and now there's a decision-making layer. His layers are totally different, but the basic idea that there's sort of different layers that you have to have in order to bring out good fruit. It comes from a guy named Sam Ovens, who is a business consultant. Anyway, the next layer here is once we sort of have the foundation and the GPS set in the strategy, the only thing different between a worldly strategy from a worldly person and people that are like, let's just say, success, we're going to define super loosely because we're talking about the world, we're talking about the church, but we'll say, McDonald's, we're going to make super cheap gross burgers that anyone can have anywhere for a nickel. That has a vision on top. And what's the vision? Increased profit. Well, that's a worldly strategy. And if we go over to a ministry, we'll just say a, quote, successful ministry, we'll just say like Saddleback Church, Rick Warren. I don't know. I don't know what his theology is, but it's a big church. Let's just say that's the vision. The top is we want to honor God and we want to bring people to God. Sure. Maybe it's a small church, but with a really large depth of discipleship and faith. God's on top. So the only difference in strategy is what is on top and what is prioritized. And we see this when we look at scripture, when Jesus says, man, I don't have it pulled up. I think we actually looked at it last meeting, but it's, well, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And the implication is you have to be willing to leave your home. Let the dead bury their own dead. He tells the rich young ruler in a different passage, sell all your possessions and give it to the poor and follow me. So the idea is you have to value me above everything else. And that is how you put together a biblical strategy. A worldly strategy is for worldly things. I think maybe even with a little bit more clarity, the only major difference between a biblical strategy and a worldly strategy is where you might put I don't know the best way to say this, but maybe the death line. Where do you die? Well, a worldly person would say, well, I want to increase. Can you see what I'm pointing at here, this little box?
Yeah.
Okay. So a worldly person would say, well, I want lots of riches and money and fame and power, and I want to enjoy that until I die, because who knows what happens after that. and they live for this world, whereas the believer puts a strategy in place, or the Christian leader puts a strategy in place in this world with the death line, you know, before the reward. Because what does the Bible say? Store up your treasures in heaven. And what is one thing that oh gosh, now I'm forgetting. I've got like 20 of his books. Oh, John Maxwell. You know, one thing that he says is the only thing you get to take with you is other people. That's the only thing. When you meet Jesus, it's like, hey, here's Sam, here's Joe, or whatever. And so the death line, the vision, and the death line would come prior to the accomplishing of the vision. And I think that's the most important way to do it, because what are you willing to die for if it's in this world? Nothing. Well, like, why would I be willing to die to make a lot of money? I'm not going to be around to spend it. I'm not going to die for that. That's crazy. What would you die for? Something that you get in the afterlife? Would you be willing to do whatever it takes in this life if it meant creating something beautiful in the kingdom of God that's glorifying to God? Yeah. So where that sort of line goes for death, either before or after the vision, I think is really the only major difference in this model between a worldly and a Christian way of seeing it. So if we accept this whole sort of vision, mission, churchgoer journey, we're putting together some steps here. This one's out of line. And we accept this. This is itself a belief about how reality works. So really, this foundation could really just be characterized by beliefs. This just being one of the most fundamental beliefs, because it's our GPS, basically. Then, once we believe that we have sort of this direction and everything is made in alignment with God's will for our ministry, which, if he gives us a vision, he doesn't have to communicate and whisper in our ear or audibly speak to us. He said, like, Brett, do ClickMail and help ministry leaders reach people more effectively. Got it. And then I know my direction unless he says otherwise, but it doesn't necessarily require him to speak to me every moment of every day. I think maybe that's, again, won't go into theology. I think that's borderlining on maybe the hyper spiritual sometimes. But either way, coming up here, once we know the direction and we sort of have this base level decision-making process, is it in line with what I believe God has for the ministry and the vision? Yes. Does it meet a need of the people in the ministry? Yes. Is it financially sustainable? Yes. When we test it, do the results come back positive in that the people that I'm trying it on actually believe it meets their need? Yes. Okay, so we can keep it. So once we have that, we can begin to look at our resources and prioritize our resources and go through an even more refined decision-making process that we will look at in the future. Beyond, you can already see this foundational layer, especially, is it in line with the vision? That cuts out 99% of your decisions. That makes life so much easier, because most of the time you just go, yep, that's not for us. And people, well, why? That's such a good thing. In your head the strategy, and it's not in line with the vision, and you can just immediately filter it out. This is something that I have read for years and years that high performers do. My mentor confirmed this for me, as he's a very well-to-do Christian godly business owner, a whole flock of kids. And he's like, when you have too many decisions, you have to filter out. You can't make every single little thing. You have to have overarching principles that help you filter through large amounts of choices, whether it's in ministry. He also runs a Christian nonprofit, but whether it's in ministry or business or with kids, you've got to be able to make split-second decisions with no thought, or you'll just be just exhausted and burnt out. So anyway, so there's decision-making process. And then above the decision-making process, and this is stuff we'll get into later. Oh, well, let me go back, because that was not the one I wanted to move. Above, still, come on. There we go. Above this decision-making process is a base level of understanding in any number of areas. You cannot make decisions about the church finances if you don't know anything about finances. So a lot of our culture today says you need to specialize. You have to be like, for example, when I went to Christian school, it was be the super best Bible, hermeneutics, exegesis, like make the best sermon and speak really well, and everybody will want to come. And that was the skill that I got. Like I paid $50,000, and can I preach and teach? I sure can. I mean, hopefully anyway. But I never learned anything about marketing. So I don't know how to get my voice to anyone else. They never taught me that. Did they teach me how to design a website? Nope. Did they teach me how to do anything with church finances? I didn't even know what taxes were. Did they teach me how to do outreach or media, or did they teach me anything to do with decision making or setting the vision or talking with the board or paperwork and legal? Like, I got to the church and it's like, well, now I have to worry about liability. What's liability? Oh yeah, go have all the kids' parents fill out all these forms. Well, that's like half my life. So they skipped everything and then taught me preaching, and that is not functional. I can't grow a ministry with one skill when there are a bunch of realms of knowledge that you have to at least be functional in. Like there's a minimum functionality that you've got to be in these areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So once you have this sort of foundation and decision-making layers, foundational layers in place, you have to also say, okay, what's the sort of base level of knowledge I need in any of these areas? Especially if you're what do you want to say, the person who is in the highest level of authority, because everything's your fault. If it doesn't work, it's
Yeah.
because, you got, I have no one to point to. Like, this is a home office. If this, if my businesses don't make any money and there's no cubicle over there, that's the dining room, like that's just how it goes. So if I'm in authority, then I'm also responsible. And that means that I have to know how the system works. And the problem with a lot of ministries is we go in, and I see this all the time. This is one of the reasons why I want to shift out of only offering marketing, because I will put in place a very complex Google Grant or Google advertising marketing system. We've been doing with a number of ministry schools or Christian schools, like K through 12. They're very effective. But because the staff does not understand what a good return on investment is, some of our advertising campaigns are returning 50x, Karen. And I think maybe you'll know what that means. Like 50x that doesn't happen. A good return on investment anywhere, you'll say the stock market, the S&P 500, which is the top 500 companies in the United States.
Yeah.
That is 10% per year averaged over the last 150 years. That is good.
Yeah.
These advertising campaigns are doing 500 times better than that. That's not, and then we were wanting 100. What do you mean you were wanting 100? This is like this is a miracle. What are you talking about? You want 100. You're putting $1 and we're giving you $50 back, or 30, or even like, you put $1 and you get 2 back is amazing. And that's average for advertising systems. And that's like the higher end of the performance. I'm definitely not saying we do that with every account, but there are some accounts where it's like, but then they're like, well, we want this changed and we want that changed. And it's like, you're not allowed to change that, because if you change it, this is what's going to happen. And then they change it anyway. And then the system breaks. Because why? And for example, I'll give you the specific is, well, they hired this one individual school, hired us 3 years ago because they had no digital leads, like literally zero. And they were all just walk-ins, and they couldn't get enough students at their business, at the Christian Academy, to make ends meet. And so they hired us to come in, and I spent like months training the director and getting it all set up and optimizing the ads. And so after the director quit, and this was in the last 6 months, they came and, well, we're getting so many leads. It's really inconvenient to be putting all this data into the systems by hand. We want to change this and this to make it easier. And it's like, hold on. You're telling me that you didn't have any systems in place and you didn't have enough leads a couple of years ago. So you hired me because I know how to do this. And then I put a system in place. And now, and I want you to recognize the decision-making process, and which is down here, the decision-making process and the lack of understanding of marketing. Basically, I set up a black box in their ministry and they have no idea how it works, and they're going in there poking things with a poor decision-making process. So you're telling me that you don't know how to do marketing and you can't fill your school, and then I build you a marketing system that is so functional that you now have more leads than you can do data entry. That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Okay. And then your solution to having too many leads is to go change the system that is producing the leads. That is the worst idea I've ever heard. The decision making there is so far from functional. It's shocking. Why don't we talk about putting a new system in place to automate it so that we don't break the system that is giving you what you wanted in the first place? And that is so common. I don't even know. I have known so many people who have tried to do marketing with the church, and after a year or two, I actually got ClickMill. It was given to me. The initial website, everything's different now, but this was years ago. They said, yeah, we started this business to run Google Grants for ministries, and we're done. We are so sick of working with pastors. We're out of here. We're going to go work with businesses. They're way easier. They don't touch stuff. They don't argue with us. They just do it. And they have money. And, that's very disheartening for me, but it's absolutely true. Pastors are super good at preaching and loving people and having a heart for the kingdom and all this stuff. But the knowledge base in other areas, they're responsible for all the areas, but they don't know anything about the other areas. And they just sort of hope, and I'm speaking broadly, we just sort of hope that other people know all the other areas, and that's not functional. And so that itself is a belief down here in the foundation. I'm speaking from my foundational beliefs. I believe in maybe what we would call specialized generalism. Would I say I'm specialized? Yes, I'm specialized in entrepreneurship and marketing. I'm also a generalist. I read broadly. I read in ministry. I read Christian stuff. I read secular stuff. I read about science. I read about faith. And I try to find the intersection of all of those things so that I can create a functional whole and I learn about systems, because how am I going to tell you how to make a system if I can't even define what a system is? So, so it's more of like a whole thinking. I am more about, I want to see the whole, because if I change how something works in the marketing, then nobody's going to come to church and no one's going to hear the preaching. If I change what happens in the marketing, it's going to affect the individual ministry programs. All of these are interrelated in the system. You can't just, and that's something that we don't recognize in ministry. So you have to have a functional understanding of each area of your church, so that you can create a functional whole. And when you change one thing over here, you understand the possible outcomes of changing something over here, of it changing something over here. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So without sort of this base level of understanding of all these areas are interrelated and my decision-making process in one area affects another area, well, that's tough, because you're going to have a lot of unexplainable, what do you want to say, just conundrums that come up. And it's like, well, we're doing everything and everything is not working. And that's why that happens. And then once you have sort of this sort of base level understanding of marketing, and let's even just say business or ministry or legal structures and all this other stuff, how to share the gospel without making people upset with you, then you come to the stuff that ministry leaders focus on. And that's like, hey, we need to have Facebook account. We need to have social media, Facebook, Instagram. We should have a church online platform that shows stuff. Like, what happens with ministries is they just look at other ministries that have this stuff. And this is the herd mentality we talked about. And they go, oh, look, they're doing email follow-up. We should do email follow-up. They're on Facebook. We should be on Facebook. But what they don't understand is that these large ministries are engaging in this foundational decision-making. And they're making the decisions strategically. I don't have a Facebook. We do have a Facebook. I do not focus on Facebook. I do not have an Instagram. I don't care about any of that, because we tried that for a while and nobody came to our website. So I quit wasting my resources on it. And I've had friends like, oh yeah, you should definitely have a XYZ account. And it's like, yeah, but I really don't care, because we're getting 30,000 hits a month right now off of Google. and it's producing clients, both training, interns, and marketing clients. Like we tried that, and that's the 80% of the effort that gets 20% of the results. I'm not interested in it. And so you can see there's a decision-making process that underlies all of the things you do. And this is the important thing. Anybody can learn to build a website. Anybody can put up a social media post. The question is does it create the fruit according to the beliefs and the vision and the mission and all this stuff that is actually relevant? Is it in line with the vision? Do we go through this decision-making process to choose which of these things we do, or are we just throwing stuff in there because we're hoping something happens? Does that speak to you? Does that make sense?
It really does. Yeah.
Okay. So that's the big picture. And so you can kind of see where we're going to be going. This is our basic outline.
Yeah.
We're going to continue talking about decision-making and then different areas. And, I won't pretend to be an expert in every area for sure. I actually just talked to a friend of mine that's very heavily involved in Christian apologetics. And I think he's going to come and start doing some training with me, and you can have access to those. I'll invite you to those too, if you want, if that's interesting to you. But anyway, either way, all that said, we're going to be going through some of these other things. Now, I'll stop sharing my screen. And in the last couple minutes, I want to hit one belief, and I'm pulling that up right now. I want to go over one belief. We've kind of already talked about risk, and we need to be willing to take risks, not crazy risks, but educated risks based on this decision-making framework. That helps us to gauge the highest level risk we can take without being poor stewards, basically. So we've kind of already talked about that. We've talked about failure. If you're not willing to fail, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay, here's one that I think we'll go with, and there's a few more that when we can do this, when we do more trainings, and maybe we can finish this section next week because there's not a ton of these, but money is a big one. And we kind of briefly touched on that at the beginning of this. Money is, I hear ministry leaders say this frequently when I talk about money. Even when I run a Christian school advertising campaign, it's like, well, it's not about the money. Well, why isn't it about the money? Well, because it's the root of all evil. And it's, it's sometimes it's said directly, other times it's sort of implied. Okay, well, firstly, it doesn't say money is the root of all evil. It says the love of money is the root of all evil. And what that means is at the top of that strategy, whether or not it's a strategist, money is on top. Jesus says, go and give all your possessions to the poor, because the guy's rich and he loves money. And so the question is, to be a Christian, are we willing to hold what God has given us with open hands? And if you want to take it, then take it. And I'm willing to give it to you because you are my top priority, not the money, not the fame, not the ministry, not whatever. And beyond that, is money evil? No, that's not the love of money. The love of money is putting money in the place of Christ. So money is not evil. The love of money is evil. So then, should every Christian be rich? No, that's not what that means either. God, maybe, like, I know we say this a lot in the church, but it's like God guides where he provides. You can flip it around. He provides where he guides. If his vision is for you to plant 20 ministries in Japan, Karen, you're going to need some money. That's just reality. And so the question then, when it relates to the strategy of your ministry, is, well, how much money do we need? And is it bad to have that? No, it's absolutely necessary to have that if that's the vision God's called your church to. Would you agree with that so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there's a functional amount. I would like to have money, and I won't be ashamed to say I would like to have a good amount of money, because my wife and I love missions. We would love to be able to travel and do missions. And I have contacts in Zambia. I have contacts in Ecuador. I've got contacts all over the place. And I would love to go to those places and be able to serve and scratch my own itch for travel. And I don't think that that's bad. And so what does that make money? It makes money a tool. And a tool does not have a moral compass. If money is like a brick. If I have a brick, I can use it to help build a house for someone that's homeless, or I can whack the homeless guy with it. The brick is a tool that I use to bring out, to manifest who I am. And so it is a point of leverage. If I have a little hammer, I can only hit little nails. If I have a big hammer, I can have more leverage to hit bigger things. And so the question is just, what am I hitting? And that tells me about me, not the hammer, not the brick. If I have 1,000,000 bricks, I can build 1,000 houses, or I can throw 1,000,000 bricks at 1,000,000 homeless people. It just makes me more of who I am. And so if I am the type of person who, and I'm definitely not going to say that this is an easy thing to do, or that I am the person. I mean, I would hope I am, but it's like, if I have $1,000,000, okay, God, you can take it away anytime you want and show me how to use it, because it's yours. 100% of it's yours. That I do not think is a bad thing. Now, the question is that necessary for the vision? You can already see that decision-making process coming in here. And that may be yes, or that may be no. You know, if the only thing I'm doing is running a digital ministry and paying for living expenses, I don't need $1,000,000. That's not really necessary. So the question is, what's required for the vision? And finances are simply a tool to accomplish that. And if you're hiking a mountain and you don't take food, you're going to have a problem. If you're trying to run a ministry and you don't have the finances, the financial tools necessary, you're going to have a problem. And that is a problem that many ministry leaders run into. And so I think that it is it is consistent with I'm not going to say it's like grounded in scripture, but I would say it seems to me that it's consistent with the biblical worldview to say that money is a tool to be used in a godly way, so long as it is within the vision and calling for God, you know, for that God has called you to. And there's an amount of it. Like, you know, I was just having a conversation with one of my brother-in-law. He's my new brother-in-law, but I have two brother-in-laws. All our wives are all sisters, but you know, my brother-in-law Zach's like, well, Brett, I mean, do you want to be a billionaire? And I'm like, no, I have no interest in being a billion. That sounds like a lot of problems, and I don't want that. But you know, like, I wouldn't mind having a good amount of income. You know, I wouldn't mind being what a lot of people might consider wealthy. I mean, I live in the most expensive place in the world, for goodness sake. I've got to have something, but I don't need to be a billionaire. I don't have any need for that. My vision does not call for being a billionaire. That's ridiculous. And so there's a functional amount of money, but I think that expands from beliefs to our resources in ministry in general. Do you need a bigger building? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. It depends on where God has your ministry going. Do you need more ministries? Do you need more programs in your ministry? In the majority of ministries I look at, there is another belief that says the more things we do, the more people we reach. And that is super unhelpful, because the more things you do, the more stressed you are, because now you have more things to look at. Usually it's like you need to cut a whole bunch of this stuff. I just read this. I don't know if I told, did I mention this book, It by Craig Groeschel?
Nope.
You'll love it. Life Church, or I don't remember, when he had like 25 churches, many of them are mega churches. This is It by Craig Groeschel, Groeschel. Great book. I felt like if I wrote a book, I was like, oh my gosh, someone else says what I say, the whole thing. It was so confirming. Anyway, yeah. But he has I was like, why does he sound so much like he has an MBA? So
it helps. Yeah.
You'll be like, yeah, this is like listening to Brett. Anyway, yeah, when he had 25 churches, and many of them in their own right were mega churches with over 1,000 weekly attendance, they only had 4 programs. They did not have a men's Bible study. They did not have a women's Bible study. I think he said they didn't even have a kids program. They had 4 strategically targeted programs that met the needs of the people that came to their ministry. What they do is they just test, exactly like I've been telling you about the banners on our website and all this stuff. It's just like, do you have an idea? Let's test it. Here's the amount you can test with, the financial resources and whatever resources. Test it. And this is what we have to see after, I think he said 90 days. And if it doesn't have a certain level of result after 90 days, they cut it and they don't apologize. That's just how it goes. And so the things that grow that are in alignment with the vision and all the other things that we can keep. And if it's not, well, presumably it's not in alignment with the vision, then you don't keep it. But I digress. Great book. And this idea of money being this sort of bad thing, man, if you think that, forgive me, man, if you think that, you're going to feel guilty every time the Lord gives you money, and you're never going to be able to do what he's called you to do. But that's also the case with anything else. Facilities, I don't even know what other resources, time, you've got your volunteers, your volunteer time, your all this other stuff, whatever the resources God gives you and you have to understand it's just a tool. It's a building block to use to the ends that God has called you to. And as long as you are doing that in the, what do you want to say, the most faithful way you can, and it's not about selfish ambition or vain conceit, right? Worldly gain, then you're fine. And I think that that's really important for ministry leaders to know, because there really is, like, I say this, and there's so much confliction about money in the church. And it's like, it's just a tool. And that's all it is. And as long as you can just hold the hands open and say, if you take it, I'm fine. I've learned to be content in all things. Fine. But seems like you called me over there, and that's going to cost 500,000. So we need 500,000. And I don't think there's any problem with that. So any thoughts or questions on today's lesson and kind of what we've been talking about? And I'm always open for pushback as well, because I'm always trying to learn, and I am certainly not Jesus. So
Yeah, I mean, the concepts all make sense to me. And I think, again, I need time and space, and there's no time and space right now in ministry, but to make time to really figure out what are those key things, like what are the needs. And I think that's what I'm still trying to wrap my head around is how do I get that information in the structure that I'm in.
So if I can't, you said, how do you get that information? Well, here's what I'd recommend. I'll give you a specific recommendation, if that's okay. Maybe we've talked about this before. So in the information gathering phase, this is something we can go through on another day. It's so timely. I found these, and we're talking about decision making. These are basically decision making, whether you understand mental models or not, is just the ability to run a decision through a number of frameworks in your mind and see if it comes out and passes the test. The reason why people make poor decisions is because they have poor tests of those decisions.
Makes sense.
And I would say from that, a poor understanding of reality. And again, we can only do our best. But one of the things that I was going to say is, I found all of these. Where is that? And these are just a list of models that I wrote down a while back and was practicing myself. But here, information gathering, collect data and insights. This is literally step 2 in that process. And the first one is define the problem and the goal. What's the problem and where's the vision? Where are you going? And so you already know that. And then the next step is gathering information. So how do you gather the information? What you need to do is you need to do this on a couple of fronts. The easiest way is to create a 3-question survey. Have we talked about this?
It sounds familiar, but I'm not remembering.
Like, if you don't do anything else, well, it's Christmas, so maybe not. But early January, I would just print the papers out and have them, and after church, go and ask everybody you can get. Say, I'm going to ask every single person, and I don't need names. I just want opinions. What is the biggest problem you're facing in your life? And you can obviously not do it around other people so they're more comfortable, whatever. What is the biggest need that you currently have in your life?
Mm-hmm.
And then what is the most impactful experience you've ever had with a church or ministry? And usually that will tell you the format they want the solution in.
Okay.
And so that's what I was telling you. Like, we tested ebooks, we tested courses, we've tested free advertising accounts. There's all these different formats. And of course, obviously it's a Bible study. Like, why did I not think about that? Or an online workshop? which is what
Right.
you came in through. Those are super functional. It's been 15 years since I was 10 or 15 years since I've been in ministry. I have to discover that. I can't just think of that anymore. I don't do pastor every day, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
you need to discover their needs, and you need to discover that format that they want it delivered in. And then what you do is maybe you get 50 of those, maybe you get 100 of those, get with your team or whoever, does stuff with you, and you go through them and you tally it up, and you'll see that the majority of your congregation will fall into any of like three, something
Okay.
like, obviously the size of congregation will determine, but 80% of the needs will fall in 20% of the categories.
Yeah.
And then you have a good place to start. You can then start looking for confirmation of that in other sources, obviously, praying with wise counsel, other people in your decision-making process, your ministry team. But beyond that, the other places you can find this are looking at data from in church, like, what do you want to say? Attendance rates or attendance numbers for specific ministries. So if they're like, well, we really want to learn about communication and marriage. And then you look at the numbers for your last communication and marriage seminar, and you're like, oh, well, there were like 500 people that came to that. And then you're doing the weekly Bible study, and there's only like 4 or 5 people. That should tell you something.
Yeah.
So the numbers, and those are called key performance indicators. And if you're not tracking them, this is something I work with a lot of Christian school directors, is you need to decide what numbers you want to track for success. And then the because that's the vision. Well, the vision is to educate kids. How do you track if you're successfully doing that? Okay, well, more kids in schools, probably one of them, through a digital medium, if we're doing digital marketing. And then is it increasing toward that number? And so over time, putting those sorts of things in place and looking once a month or once a quarter and saying, are we getting closer to this or further away from this? And when we change something, are we, like we're increasing it, 5 per month, and then we change something, and then we're only increasing it 3 per month. Well, we
Right.
should probably unchange that. And so those are some further confirmations, but the survey is very
For
easily,
one step. Yeah. Okay.
that's the 20% of the effort that'll get you 80% of the way there. And then it's testing and looking for other data to confirm and continue testing, if that answers your question.
It does. That's great. Cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, my pleasure. Any other questions or thoughts or anything before we call it for the day?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay. Anything I can do better for you in future weeks, or anything you think other ministry leaders would appreciate?
No, what I appreciate is that I know this is on my schedule, and life keeps trying to take that away from me. So
I got you.
I like that I can say, no, this is
Okay.
part of my learning, and I have to go do this. So
Love it. Okay. Well, awesome. Karen, thank you so much, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye bye.